Hello and welcome to Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm Kelsey.
I'm Lily.
And I'm Josh. What are we going over today, Laney?
Today we'll be discussing how to define literature.
This is going to be an interesting conversation. I'll say that much. But where do we begin?
Is it by James Joyce? It passes.
Literature is defined as being the art of written work. Could this fit any and all things that have been written?
Literature as a word, yes. However, there is, like with anything, good literature, bad literature. Original literature, cliched works.
But those are subsets of literature as a whole.
Of literature as a whole. I see it as the art of written work.
So is my income tax return lit? Because that's written words.
No, those are written words. That is not a written work. That's the difference.
It says the art of the written word is the definition.
If you wanted to say,
well, they're not artful.
The Declaration of Independence could be defined as literature. However, your income tax return.
I think if you call it literature, it is literature.
Do you think it's maybe like written word that has some sort of like message, whether the lack of that message is there or not? Like 'cause your tax return doesn't have a point, except.
Oh, the return, the fact, what we're getting back. What we're getting back.
It could be a comment on how much money you're not making and the struggle of the, average American worker. Of course, it's literature.
The fact that we're getting money back is just a light bulb.
I was just throwing a wrench in it, but sure. You next leveled me, GG.
But then again, there are so many things that you can, if you say the income tax return is a work of literature, and so is your schedule in your
Planner.
My planner might be the most important work of literature to my being at any given time, so I will second that motion.
And you yourself wrote it.
And I am the author of my destiny, so.
Yeah, you are the master of your fate. You are the captain of your soul.
Wednesday gym, 5 o'clock. Thursday work. It's very important to me.
diaries and journals have become great works of literature.
Yeah. And that's just because it's a great work to. I think that just the term great work holds a lot of significance too, because something that's a great work to me might be of high literary value even if no one else has even read it. Like I know my fiance sent me his journal back. He documented everything that happened over his deployment, and it's to me a really significant source of literature. It's his story for 8.5 months of his life that I couldn't be there. But will the world ever see it? No.
Or look at something like On the Road. Kerouac admitted how he came up with the free-form style was he was living with this man Hal Chase, because they all went to Columbia together, and Hal Chase was friends with Neal Cassady. And Neal Cassady at the time was in reform school and would send Chase letters, and Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac would read them, and they'd be like, this guy can write, this is what lit should be doing. And that's what he owes the style of On the Road to. But will the world ever see those letters unless they end up published?
I don't know if you could make those accusations. I think that, I don't think, for Robert Walser, who's one of my favorite writers, he's a Swiss author, he probably did not assume that his microscripts that he wrote in the institution were going to be published someday.
But they did.
But they were published, so granted he was already a developed author, but then again, when you talk about whose diaries are going to be published,
You never know.
yeah, I mean, Anne
Personal significance, too.
Anne Frank's work was published. If someone else who was part of the Holocaust had a diary.
There are other Holocaust journals, but I guess why hers is the part of the canon? Maybe because she's young.
Probably. It was coming of age novels, and that's a real life one. in a very, particular circumstance that everybody holds to great esteem because it fascinated by.
Antonio Gramsci was completely unknown and in a prison in Italy when his diaries were published, and you read them in graduate lit courses.
You never
That is
know.
Nice taste of what literature has to offer.
So is there anything, this is just a sub-question, is there anything that personally you guys would discard as, not view literature at all?
Not as literature in general, no.
Are you saying, do I want to be Prospero, wave my magic wand, and this is not literature?
In
I'm
an
asking
opinion.
in the people's eye.
Everybody has a different opinion.
Even if, because I think, like, for me, everything written is literature. Even if it's bad literature, it has significant value because it helps increase, if it's bad literature to you, it helps show you what you favor in the literature. It's all got value to it. And I was just wondering if anyone felt differently of that, but that's just my opinion.
I agree.
No, everything's necessary. I was gonna say, if you could pick, that would make you a monster. No one person should be able to pick.
Absolutely.
The
'Cause if it's
Nazis
not-
tried.
If it's not significant, it's still a conversation topic. It'll bring you somewhere. Maybe that'll spark an idea for the next great American novel. Like, you don't know.
Exactly.
And then at the same time, what we may deem as a work of garbage now, in 100 years, may be something that they
Yeah.
study in
That'd be
classrooms.
I often wonder if people read novels that we hold in high esteem and were got to the 20th page and just put the book aside and started the next one
They didn't
because
teach,
it wasn't.
They didn't teach American literature in classrooms until the 20s.
Yeah, they thought it was a waste.
And pedantic, yeah.
Before, originally, it was just the Roman and Greek literature.
Yeah,
That
it was
what
classicism. That was
That
the
what classics
lit
were.
department was. There wasn't such a thing as a lit major or an English major. You had a classics major, which was you read Greek or Latin.
And then
or
eventually things would
Eastern
progress.
languages.
You would, Shakespeare became scholarly, then British literature in general, American literature would come in later. And I think now we're just seeing, it's coming down to what we identify as authentic literature.
Speaking of, if you're interested in reception history, there's a book I love a lot called Must We Burn Sod, which was about the Marquis de Sade was a novelist, 18th and 19th century in France. He dies in a psych asylum in the ward at Charenton, and he writes very, very vividly and very grossly about a lot of very violent things. We owe the word sadism to him, but the book is arguing it's the reception history of his novels. Do they have merit as a document of revolutionary France?
Yeah, I agree. Do we want to go to the next question?
Okay. Is there such a thing as literary and genre fiction in your mind, or do you feel these things are too vague?
I think the two classifications are, I don't like to say literary fiction is what we should be studying and genre fiction is what you read for fun, because it's much more complex and complicated.
Oh, you mean
than that.
high fiction, low fiction, things you lit and then fiction?
Or for
Right,
example,
yeah.
vampire fiction is genre fiction,
Right.
is it on the same?
That's more so, it's very,
I've read some really compelling genre fiction novels, I guess, that would be considered genre fiction that I've never
I was gonna say there
held in less esteem. Yeah.
There are some genre pieces that I'd say were lit.
if it's not an original idea, then it's usually classified under an umbrella. For instance, Dracula is a work of literature because it's relatively an original vampire work.
Yeah, it wasn't the first vamp story, but it's
Vlad the
one
Impaler
of the
was
first.
where the whole
Right.
legend began, but branching off of that, Anne Rice's that's an interpretation
I was
of
gonna
the
say.
vampire
I was just
work.
gonna say. I would say the Vampire Chronicles are lit.
It is literature. everything is literature,
Right.
It is
but
genre fiction.
it'd be classified as vampire fiction, which it branches off. You can't
But
say
genre fiction is just a subcategory under literary fiction.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a different thing.
I really
I was
don't.
gonna
It's just a more
say-
specific classification.
Of literature.
But I think what we're asking is, when we say genre fiction, is that subordinate to literary
Yeah.
fiction? And it's not.
No, it's
Should
not.
we make it-
It's not
should we
subordinate.
make
It's
it
just, I think, a
Right.
smaller grouping. It's just a more organized way of
I
you
think
know,
it's
thinking
far,
about
it's
ideas.
far more complex. I don't really think genre fiction being the one major umbrella.
That gets broken down into tons of other
because
things.
It's got to be broken down.
But they're not up and down like this. They're straight across the board. You know what I mean? It's just for me, it's just an organizational
much.
schema. It's not a categorization of value.
For
But-
an example, Harlan Ellison won't let people call him a science fiction writer.
But I think it becomes a problem when we associate connotations with these words, like, you know, when you associate the fact that genre fiction isn't as good as literary.
Right.
I want to go off on what you had to say about the classifications. Most authors are classified in a different way than they would classify themselves, if they even want to be classified in the first place.
Right.
Because I know that Robert McCammon, who he wrote Swan Song, Gone South, he wrote a zombie short story called Eat Me. But he was, what discouraged him from writing was the fact that people were classifying. He felt that he needed, or the way that he felt that he wrote was much different than what
I understand.
we'll take.
I'm gonna make a sub-side reference to believe I believe it was Aerosmith who didn't want a warning label on their album, like adult content label, because they felt that it was negative and that it would hinder their musical career. What it ended up doing was spiking their sales because more teens were able to buy things that they knew were appropriate. So it had kind of an adverse effect, and I feel like some authors don't want to be categorized because it feels like they may diminish it. But in a sense, for me, I mean, I choose a lot of my novels based off what the last novel I liked was. So when I see, you know, an umbrella or a genre of novels that I already know I like and it leads me to more, it's like a little pathway down, you know, things that I enjoy. And I feel like that's kind of necessary for readers, even if authors don't think so.
And then also books could be classified in multiple ways. Like it could be science fiction, it could be, you know, like many different things, but one person sees it as just
That's
that.
like people say, I just know a big debate when I was talking with some of my friends was, should we call Octavia Butler a queer author or a science fiction author?
That's another.
Or
that's
just simply
another
an author.
part of it. I really don't look at. I think that literature is literature, and I really don't. If you want to classify based off of country, background, race, creed, that would be one thing.
That's super interesting because I don't think of classification in that way. And I know that some do, like some people will reach out for an author of the same, I don't know, cultural background because it speaks to them. I look solely on book content. So like when I'm looking at categorization, I'm looking at like, oh, okay, well, this is a science fiction novel about time travel. And I read one of those and I liked it. Maybe I'll like this one too. And like, maybe it seems really simple, but I found a lot of great novels that way. So like you said, there are so many ways to classify and to be classified, and it's so many, you know, it's like a maze of complex paths we can be led down. And, you know, just because you're coming from the left and I'm coming from the right doesn't mean we might not find the same novel in the middle.
That's the way of looking at it in based off of content, not
Author.
background. Yeah, which that's what sometimes I feel that I need to look at it in that particular way. For instance, I know Lily is a fan of her poetry. Elizabeth Bishop.
She's phenomenal.
I really don't see her as being an LGBT poet. I see her as being a poet, a great American poet, and I think that by being a great American poet, she speaks so powerfully.
But the
and
thing
establishing
is
herself.
that she's not only an American poet, she's also an LGBT poet, and she's also, you know, like this kind of poet. She also writes this kind of poetry. It's
Right, an
all-
author can be a cultural
She
author and
happens
still
to-
write 4 different genres of books.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be, I would say that is logical, even though I think that making the fact that the action speaks louder than,
Like, I'll throw a wrench in this. Is it still fair to call Adrienne Rich's pre-out books by a lesbian author?
Which,
I think we have to judge her by
we don't have
her
to.
right, we don't
I
have
don't
to judge
think-
her, we have to.
Analyze.
The way that we look at it is Adrienne Rich is a poet, not,
Right.
not.
It's the
from
same
her
thing
background.
for literary fiction and genre fiction. It's all subcategories you have. I'm trying to think of an example. I'll use John Green because that's what our last episode was on. You have John Green, who's a poet for young adult poet. That's what he's been labeled as. That's what his, but then you have different strands of novels that might speak more to LGBT or might speak more to different genres of that subcategory. And it can be broken down again and again and again and again to get all of these different appeals.
If you're just looking at them through different lenses, like if you want to look at a book through a biographical stance, then you would say that this person is LGBTQ or something of that nature. But if you want to look at it from just, what genre does this fit into, then you would just say it's a vampire novel or it's, this or
Right.
it's that.
Do you
Because we like to
remember?
categorize.
Do you remember in aspects of novels when we read Slaughterhouse-Five? And we spent like the whole day on, can we call this a science fiction book?
And it's a debate that, is something that's based on multiple novels because you have components of science fiction, absolutely, but are there people who feel strongly rooted in the topic that would say it's not science fiction? Absolutely as well. And that can still appeal to different readers because if you're interested in science fiction and that's a way to market it for you, then that's a way to market it. But as another reader, it might not be the best category for your view, your lens of that novel.
These are all just words we use to describe this. Like when
Right,
you're telling
yeah,
a friend
it's just
about a novel, you're trying to come up with the words they know to tell them about this, and that's when these things come to mind, and that's where they're rooted in, just how to
Then these-
relate these things to others.
Then the categories come into play because then it will. It'll give them an idea of whether or not the category works for them.
And it's interesting. I mean, like I said off camera, my Kindle pops up with suggested things for me. And if I read The Bridge to Terabithia, I reread it because it's such a good book, and I just reread it recently. And all of a sudden, like all these novels from my past popped up. And they're like, you might like this. I was like, I might. You're right. And like that was my Kindle's way of being like, I saw you read Bridge to Terabithia. It's just another little stack. So that's how my Kindle tells me what I might like, and it's how, like you said, friends describe it. It's how categorization helps authors and novels be related to potential readers.
I remember I felt like almost a little bad when talking about genreing. I gave one of my students Siren's Petition, and I was like, I'm gonna go against Vonnegut's own grain here and call him a science fiction writer,
Right.
just so I have a way of
Relating it to the
Right.
student. Yeah.
And I would say that he was more of a satirist.
Right.
You would never tell us that that's a science fiction novel, but to get through the medium to say what you need to say, it holds different value, different water for different people. Absolutely.
Move on.
What is the significance of literature to society?
What isn't the significance?
I was
It's pretty
just
heavy.
gonna
It's a
say
heavy
that.
question.
Literature is a map to the world. You can read about any subject, you can go any place, you can be anything, turning pages. And I've learned more about the world through the books that I've read than the classes I've taken. And I think that is really significant.
I think literature is a human perspective on the world around us, which
Absolutely.
I absolutely agree with that. Even my British literature too instructor, she mentioned that the reason people write poetry is because it makes us human. People read and write poetry because it's one of the closest connections to what people are and how people are constructed, even if something isn't truthful. We have that connection, we have that idea that,
People aren't truthful sometimes, so it's.
for instance, Robert Frost, we learn that he is very satirical with his poetry, and that The Road Not Taken was a commentary on indecisiveness as opposed to
The way it's been
the-
misconstrued popularly throughout time.
Mhm.
graduations.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important. I think it helps you learn what you like, what you don't like, where you'd like to go, take you places you've never been.
Helps you relate to other people.
Exactly. It's an eye-opening thing.
The one that
literature.
most booktubers say, that they read because it puts them in a completely different world. They can escape.
You
My
can be
mom
anywhere.
said to me, it was last year I posted this, I don't know if anyone saw it, but my mom was like cooking and running around and I was reading. She was like, Nicole, I need you to do this. I was like, okay, yeah, just after this chapter. She's like, Nicole, the world is going on around you. There are things going on around you. And I was like, I know, that's why I'm reading. I'm sorry. I'll be right there. And I was like, there's a world going on here too. Give me a minute. So I don't know. It's important. People that even, like we had said, everything is literature. People find different things, different education and magazines and all these little things. They're all just tools.
Same thing can be attributed to music and to art. I know that was the one thing that really drove me into Mr. Holland's Opus, where
Oh, that's such a good movie.
the board
Love
was
that
telling
movie.
him, "Oh, you need to teach the classics. You have to," and then he goes into the room and teaches them what he feels they should know. Tries to connect with them based off what they like, and then pulls the one girl who was struggling in class to figure out what music really was. Even songs like Louie Louie by the Kingsmen that are about absolutely nothing, and that you can't
It's
even
still
understand.
art.
Yeah, it is art. That's the point.
But that's why it's so hard to define, is because it is art and it can't be defined.
I think
Or Scaffold with Louis the Pig, we'll drink the drink to Louis the Pig, the savior of the human race, who invented a medicinal compound that was efficacious in every case. I mean, it makes no sense, but it's...
That's what matters. That's what art is. That's what I know. I had an argument with an instructor of mine about literature being art, which, in its own little way, it is.
Most definitely
Of course
is.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, I would include it. I'm an art major. I would include it in there in a heartbeat. Like, they're
Mhm.
so closely tied, at least for me personally,
You're using words to paint the picture.
and vice versa.
Ooh,
And
let's
that-
end on that note. That was good. Look at you. I like that.
Catching Me Without My Hero with 1,000 Faces copy, so I can't read the preface where Campbell is talking about how, he blames all the ills of what has happened to the world, how people have fallen out from one another, on their lack of connection to stories. Because look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first words are, I will tell of, and the whole thing unravels from there. It's
I
like,
love the Epic of
power to
Gilgamesh.
speak
Oh
is
my gosh.
everything.
That is most definitely true, especially when you're setting the stage, because Gilgamesh has historically been deemed the first work of literature.
And I learned about Epic of Gilgamesh first in my art history class because of its relevance to artistic
It's a-
works that were pervaded over
That's a
time.
new
So
kind of art, when art was sketches on boulders of rock and caves,
carvings.
carvings. That
Someday I want to go to Lascaux and see the cave paintings.
It's so hard to get in there now. They restrict it to prevent damage, but it is beautiful.
Anybody have any final thoughts?
Don't define literature.
Appreciate it.
Well, it defines you, doesn't it?
True,
So,
true.
Yeah.
Indeed. It is a huge aspect of what makes us human. So there really isn't much to actually. If I were to recommend something, just go out and get a book. Go read something.
Anything.
That's my recommendation for today. If you like us, like, comment, subscribe, follow us along. We would be happy to have you on this ride. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. Till then, keep reading.
Or start. So they're all going to start.